Hello, my name is Zach Jolka, and I am a project coordinator with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM. And this is a pre-recorded presentation covering next steps for the planning and leasing in the Gulf of Maine. BOEM is publishing two documents in the Federal Register, a request for interest, or RFI, which is the first step in the commercial leasing process for the Gulf of Maine, and a request for competitive interest, or Rfci, which is the next step in processing the state of Maine's research lease application. These Federal Register notices will initiate two separate 45-day comment periods. This graphic depicts two distinct tracks advancing in the Gulf of Maine: commercial planning and leasing along the top, and the processing of Maine's research lease application along the bottom. I'm going to start by covering the commercial track. As set forth by Secretary Holland in the fall of 2021, BOEM is looking to hold up to 7 offshore wind lease sales by 2025. 2 of those sales in the New York Bight and Carolina Long Bay occurred earlier this year. The Gulf of Maine is the bottom bar of this graphic and projects a lease sale by the 3rd or 4th quarter of 2024. Now I'm going to quickly review BOEM's 4-phase process for offshore wind energy development. The first 2 phases, planning and analysis and leasing, are most relevant to our current stage for the Gulf of Maine, and I'll go into more detail there in a moment. Once BOEM holds a lease sale and issues leases, the next phase is the site assessment phase, which can last up to 5 years and includes survey work and the preparation or submission of a construction and operations plan, or COP. Lastly comes the construction and operations phase, which starts at COP approval and continues through installation and operation. Now, zooming in on that planning and analysis and leasing phase, we are currently at the red marker for the Gulf of Maine commercial leasing effort, the publication of a request for interest, or RFI. Leading into the development of the RFI, we first held 2 Gulf of Maine task force meetings. Most recently, in May of this year, I'll highlight that BOEM shared an RFI development framework and an engagement approach to provide clarity on public engagement opportunities over the next 1 to 2 years of our process. So what's in the RFI? Well, the map on the screen is the final RFI area, which is built on the draft RFI area presented as part of the RFI development framework at the May task force meeting. And the final RFI area removes areas that are incompatible with offshore wind, including existing traffic separation schemes, Stellwagen National Marine Sanctuary, and the request for competitive interest, or Rfci area, which is part of a separate leasing process. However, the RFI area leaves the remaining area, which is over 13 million acres, to maximize the public's opportunity to provide input and inform additional removals that will be made in the next phases of the planning process, including the call area identification and wind energy area identification phases. The final RFI area mirrors the draft area shared earlier this year, with the exception of the expanded Rfci area, which I'll cover when we shift to Maine's research lease application. This is the engagement approach that was shared at the May task force meeting. I'll highlight that we are currently at the first orange flag, or RFI publication, and you are watching the BOEM RFI recording. Following the 45-day comment period, the next engagement opportunity will be a series of BOEM-led meetings to receive feedback on draft call areas. More information about the timing and location of these meetings will be made available in the coming weeks, but we expect them to generally occur in the November to December timeframe of 2022. BOEM has been making a concerted effort to respond to public feedback on our process, and as a result, we have integrated several improvements to our Area ID process, all of which are incorporated into our Gulf of Maine commercial planning effort. Those improvements can be organized into 3 major buckets. Number 1, improving best available science and modeling. Number 2, increased meaningful engagement opportunities. And number 3, transparency in our process and decision-making. On the science and modeling front, BOEM is funding important studies to gather baseline ecological data in the Gulf of Maine. BOEM is also incorporating ecosystem-based modeling and advancing a BOEM study to create an EBM framework, as well as collaborating with NOAA's National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science, or NCOS. This will increase BOEM's ability to take a holistic view of the ecosystem and its management decisions, while also exploring dynamic modeling and forecasting conditions under climate change. Also, we are creating additional opportunities for engagement, both formally and informally, by starting with an RFI and having stakeholder meetings on draft areas before their publication. Lastly, on transparency, BOEM has been intentional about showing our work through such documents as the RFI development framework and the publication of decision memos. Now we'll take a look at the timeline for the Gulf of Maine commercial leasing milestones. Note that these dates are referring to calendar quarters, and all the target dates are tentative and subject to change. I'll highlight that we are currently discussing the publication of the request for interest, or RFI. The next step will be the call for information and nominations, targeting a Q1 2023 publication for that. That will be followed by the area identification step, where we'll aim to designate wind energy areas in the Q3 of 2023. And then lastly, we are planning for the lease sale steps to commence with the publication of a proposed sale notice in Q4 of 2023, followed by a final sale notice in Q2 of 2024, and ultimately an auction in Q3 of 2024. I'll also just note that this table does not show all of the engagement opportunities that will take place. For example, task forces are incredibly valuable tools in the leasing process, and several meetings can be expected, even though they're not shown here. Now we'll shift gears to talk about the state of Maine's research lease application. Again, the research lease is currently on a separate track from the commercial process. Maine submitted a research lease application to BOEM in October of 2021 for a floating research array in federal waters. The application is available on both BOEM and the state of Maine's websites. And I'll highlight that in the application, Maine's requested lease area for the research array is approximately 25 nautical miles from the mainland and includes 15 square miles of area, or approximately 10,000 acres. The research array would include up to 12 floating turbines with a generation capacity of up to 144 megawatts. Also, Maine's proposed research framework is divided into 3 topic areas, which include human dimensions, ecosystem in the environment, and technology development. In reviewing Maine's application, BOEM has completed the first step, which is determining that the state is legally, financially, and technically qualified to hold a renewable energy lease on the outer continental shelf. Upon receipt of an unsolicited lease application, BOEM's regulations require that BOEM publish a request for competitive interest, or Rfci, in the Federal Register to determine if there is competitive interest in developing a commercial wind energy project within the requested lease location. As noted earlier in the presentation, the Rfci will publish with a 45-day comment period. So what is in the Rfci? The map on the right shows the Rfci area, which is the green shaded area with the black outline. The Rfci area is 12 lease blocks, or 68,320 acres, and expands upon the lease area requested by Maine. This expansion was informed by Maine's narrowed area of interest, which is that red polygon, and that was their planning step before identifying their preferred lease area. The Rfci area allows for additional siting deconfliction of any potential lease that may move forward within the Rfci area. Notably, the area requested by the state of Maine is at the mouth of an existing traffic separation scheme. The US Coast Guard has expressed concern with this location, and the Rfci requests additional information both on this potential conflict and any others within the Rfci area. It is important to note that the Rfci clearly states that only one lease, approximately the size and scale of the research array proposed by Maine, will have the potential to move forward within the Rfci area. As required by regulation, the Rfci seeks to identify whether there is competitive interest in developing a commercial wind energy project within the requested lease location. BOEM recognizes the value of research, including many of the research priorities outlined in the state of Maine's research lease application. Therefore, BOEM is requiring that indications of interest include a conceptual research framework, which mirrors the research priorities in Maine's application and would ensure that any lease advanced within the Rfci area would carry out research that BOEM sees as valuable to informing the orderly and expeditious advancement of floating wind in the Gulf of Maine and in other deep water regions. Additionally, the Rfci asks interested and affected parties to provide comment on the potential impacts of offshore wind leasing in the Rfci area, as well as information on other existing uses and relevant data. If there is competitive commercial interest, the process moves into the competitive planning and leasing process. If BOEM determines that there is no competitive interest, BOEM will publish that determination in the Federal Register. Regardless of the leasing pathway, commercial or research, BOEM must also perform an analysis and conclude that the requested lease area is suitable for offshore wind development. As part of this analysis and prior to issuing a lease, BOEM must complete a National Environmental Policy Act or NEPA analysis to assess the effects of leasing and site characterization activities. This typically takes the form of an environmental assessment or EA. Again, revisiting this graphic from earlier, if BOEM determines that there is competitive interest, we may decide to incorporate all or some of the Rfci area into the competitive commercial leasing process, where it would next be evaluated for possible inclusion in a call area and then potentially carried through the process and offered in an auction as a commercial lease with the research attributes outlined in the Rfci's conceptual research framework. Should we determine that there is no competitive interest, following the site suitability analysis and environmental assessment, BOEM may issue a research lease to the state of Maine. Importantly, should Maine receive a research lease, we currently estimate that issuance would precede any commercial leasing in the Gulf of Maine by approximately 18 months. Following the scenario where there is no competitive interest in the Rfci area, this is the timeline for a potential research lease issuance to the state of Maine. Following the publication of the Rfci and a 45-day comment period, BOEM would evaluate the indications of interest and comments received and publish a determination of no competitive interest in the fourth quarter of 2022. We would then develop and publish a draft environmental assessment, followed by a final EA in the second quarter of 2023. Shortly thereafter would follow the execution of the research lease. The steps and timeline for the competitive interest scenario would mirror what was presented earlier for the commercial leasing process in the Gulf of Maine. So to summarize, BOEM is publishing two documents in the Federal Register, a request for interest or RFI, and a request for competitive interest or RFCI. This will initiate two separate 45-day public comment periods. Links to those Federal Register notices will be available on BOEM's Gulf of Maine webpage, along with a how to comment fact sheet that provides tips on how to provide helpful comments. Thank you for watching this presentation. My contact information is on this slide should you have any questions.